is now in session.
This is a rare look at a hearing inside the San Antonio State Hospital in Texas.
Do you have an opinion on whether the patient has a mental illness?
She has schizophrenia. She still has some residual delusions that I don't expect to go away at any point, but she has at least reached a point where I think we can manage her as an outpatient. The problem with her in the years past, though, is very, very, very poor compliance with outpatient care.
Judge Oscar Kazin is signing a court order mandating outpatient treatment for someone who has spent a lifetime in and out of psychiatric hospitals. The goal is to stop that revolving door. It's called Assisted Outpatient Treatment, AOT.
Everyone that comes through the door has to make these promises, okay? We promise you that we'll provide you with the team. We'll be there whenever you need us. We'll get housing and transportation, and we'll be following and helping you in any way you need, all right?
Thank you, sir.
But I just need 3 promises back from you. So rule 1, be honest. Rule 2, be where you gotta be.
Yes, sir.
The third one's the toughest one, okay? I'm gonna encourage you through this whole thing. Take your meds exactly like you're supposed to take your meds when you're supposed to take your meds.
We'll get back later to Judge Kazin's program, the first of its kind in Texas. But now, the story of 2 talented boys.
Eric was absolutely a child prodigy. From the time he was 2, he wanted to play the piano. When he entered competitions, and he always placed or won.
And then the university also put on a production of Der Fledermaus, Mozart's opera. And they asked him if he would play a Mozart piece in the middle of that production.
He went to school at age 6, well, it has to be 6 in September. And after the first semester, the teacher and the school psychologist and the principal called us in and wanted to move him to 2nd grade. He was that gifted. He also was in the gifted program from its inception through high school, I guess. Very bright. He won a national award for his writing for an essay the year he graduated from high school. So he also wrote well.
Then, signs of trouble for both families. For the Smiths, Eric was showing less and less interest in everything he'd ever cared about, and more of what they'd read were red flags.
It was a check mark by every answer. And
do you remember some of those questions?
well, are his grades slipping? Is he disrespectful? Is he, retreating to his room more often?
Trouble also for Chris.
In April of '92, he became insistent that he had to drop out of school and write a book to save the world. And he got into the camper that he'd rehabbed, the VW bus he'd rehabbed the year before in my driveway, and started driving cross country. It took him a while because he kept getting lost. So unlike the very bright young man who could navigate any place, he was confused.
He was so combative, I guess. I mean, just not really.
Anger. I mean,
yeah, that's a better word.
He was angry and probably uncomfortable.
A family trip was a wake-up call for Kathy Weaver.
We got down to Brazil, and the very first night, I woke at 3 in the morning to see him crawling out of the window, which was the first floor of the room we were in, all 3 of us, and he disappeared, and we couldn't find him. We searched everywhere. We went out in the streets and called the police. Early the next morning, he showed up. He'd been hiding behind the bar in the restaurant. He'd heard us. He just thought that was funny. I realized then I had my hands full.
Back home from Brazil, an emergency psychiatric evaluation, hospitalization, and at last, a diagnosis.
It was paranoid schizophrenia.
Hard for a parent to hear that, isn't it?
It's hard to even say it.
Eric's parents took him to therapist after therapist. The diagnosis was disturbing.
Well, it said that he was very likely bipolar, possibly schizophrenic, was going to have authority issues, had
potential criminal background upcoming in his future. I mean, it was a denial.
Shocking.
We, in our minds, said there's no way that could be our son.
We were well educated and we think smart people, and it took us 2.5 years to really accept his illness, maybe longer, maybe more.
When I was told that I was bipolar and that I needed to be on medications, I said, I don't need to be on any medication.
When we'd have family meetings and we'd be crying and desperate that why is our family falling apart? Because trying to manage Eric, and he was just tearing us apart.
He came to live with me. That was the first place where I'd become afraid of him. And I asked his brother to come visit and help me get him into other housing. And Chris resisted that, and when we insisted, he attacked his brother. And when I tried to pull him off, I'd never seen violence before. After he hit Patrick, he turned and hit me. And Patrick said, call the police, and so I did. And when they asked, take him to the hospital or take him to jail, I said, he's ill, he needs to go to a hospital. But he was so ill that he frightened the people at that hospital, and they transferred him fairly quickly to another one. And within a week, he was out again.
Out and back in, 6 involuntary hospitalizations in all for Chris. He wouldn't take his medications in between. There's a medical explanation for it.
Anosognosia is a term coming from neurology that we use when people don't realize that they're sick.
Dr. E. Fuller Torrey has been researching severe mental illness for more than 40 years.
And it's very clear that about half the people with schizophrenia and roughly 40% of the people with bipolar disorder have some degree of anosognosia. In other words, they don't recognize their own illness. And it's not just denial. Denial, we're all capable of denial and use it pretty freely. But anosognosia is really a biological-based deficit in the brain that makes it very difficult to impossible for them to acknowledge, yes, I'm sick, yes, I need medication.
Anosognosia is exactly what I think he had. I believe that my son, Chris, over the course of repeated breakdowns, lost his capacity to understand his illness.
You may have wondered why you haven't heard from Chris. He took his own life in January 2000. There'd been a confrontation at home.
So he got in his truck and drove away, and we never saw him again. He came down to Texas, and we talked to him and kept trying to get him to take meds, and he got some help from different family members, but he ultimately chose to take his life rather than take medication. And we found this big bag of little white pills in his car, a little plastic bag about like the size of a soccer ball, full of tiny white pills.
The medications he was supposed to be taking. Was Eric Smith headed down the same path? Here was his thinking at the time.
I said, I'm fine not on medications. You know, medication is for people that are hallucinating or this or that.
It was rough at home. After more than 5 years of turmoil, Brad and Nancy had had enough.
We weren't getting along, and I was basically kicked out of the nest. But at the time, I was viewing that as awesome. I'm getting my own place. There was nothing in the outside world other than my parents saying, what you're doing is wrong. You need to slow down. You're heading right for a brick wall.
But we bring Eric groceries first, and then we said, why aren't we shopping for him? So we gave him money. And he would curse us and take the money. And we let him, because of course we said, okay, well, he can't starve to death. He's going to wake up anytime. I mean, we still expected there was hope.
I had already started hallucinating mildly, and I remember spending most of my time in that apartment right up until the guy confronted me 2 or 3 times when he was like, the rent is due. And I said, all right, I'll get it for you. But then by like the 2nd or 3rd time that he confronted me about it, I just took a couple of expensive things that I had, like my laptop, some electronics, put it in my car, and just drove away. I left like my clothes there, everything. I wasn't even thinking about it.
And he literally started living in his car. And since he had never emptied out from one of his moves, his car was already a mess. And he literally had the space just behind on the wheel. And not even that, because we found food rotting under the mat. So,
yeah, he had food under the mats, all his clothes, all his dirty laundry, all old eaten food packages.
But half of his apartment,
and half of his stuff,
dishes.
Some of the things were in his car as well.
It was horrible.
A cop came over on the second morning that I was doing this and said, well, you can't sleep here in this parking lot because we've gotten a complaint about that and I can't see you here doing that again or I'll have to arrest you.
If you have someone with anosognosia who won't accept treatment, then you have two choices. One is, okay, we'll leave them alone, and they end up homeless or in jail or committing a crime or whatever. I don't think that's particularly humane. The alternative is to say, okay, they don't recognize they need treatment. The rest of us clearly see that the person needs treatment. We're going to mandate treatment one way or the other, often done through the courts.
Prior to his leaving that one-room apartment, we went to see him to encourage him to get work, but he would say, Mom, Dad, don't worry, I've got Bill Gates and Forbes have my back on this. That's what he says, oh, I'm in conversation. We knew things were starting to go.
He had stopped taking his pills.
He was convinced that I was a member of a West Coast gang, that I was a thug, and he told Nancy that I was going to kill her and she needed to be protected. And he met me at one of the local shopping malls to get one of his, whatever it was I was delivering. And he tried physically to restrain me in that parking lot. He tried to grab things out of my car and force a fight in the parking lot. I was able to get away from the situation. I mean, it was I felt threatened. He's physically big, and I was threatened, and he was threatening me to knock me down. It was horrible. It was, here's my son. He's ours, and I'm confronted with, do I defend myself? Do I have to hit my son? Physically restrain my son? What the hell am I going to do?
So frightened by their hallucinating hostile son, the Smiths sought a restraining order. It all came to a head around dinner time on an August evening in 2009.
My parents' gate is closed. There's a gate in front of their house. I hop the fence.
Eric comes through the door and says, I want to talk to Mom. And now I am really scared because I don't know what his motivation is. He's thinking I'm going to...
It was an aggressive entrance. He was, I am going to talk to Mom.
You can't stop me.
I remember just feeling an irrational rage that I basically couldn't control.
I told Eric that he was trespassing. Did he realize that? I said, yeah, I don't care. And then he said something to the effect, I'm going to break your face, Dad.
At this point, we were both indoors, and then I stepped outside, and then my dad closed the door and locked it, and he said, I'm going to call the police. If you're still here, by the time they get here, they're going to arrest you.
He said fine, and he sat on the porch
Bring
waiting
him
for
on.
the police.
I never hit my dad, but if he came outside, I was in a rage. I don't know that I wouldn't have. What I'm trying to say is that wasn't me. Obviously it was me. Like, there was not another person that was Eric Smith who was there. But mentally, that is not me.
It was horrible to see him handcuffed on our property and being led away.
Their gifted son, Eric, had become Eric Winston Taylor Smith, inmate 936162.
His grip on reality had become so severe, we had never seen him in the condition he was in.
He had no reality.
It was scary, and even his brother, who called him when in jail.
Wow.
When David called Eric, he said, oh my God, I had no idea my brother was this sick. I said, he was shocked.
And I started saying things that were scaring people, like I threatened to kill a couple of police officers. I told them that on the streets that I was an assassin.
The possibility was real. Eric would be released in this condition. Frantic, his parents lobbied to keep him locked up.
I said, my son is mentally ill. Please don't let him go, begging. Please, please, please don't release him.
30 days in the jail's mental health unit receiving treatment, but still not stable. Eric was transferred to the state psychiatric hospital. He was hallucinating when he got there.
I arrive at the state hospital, and one of the first things that I do when I'm there is I see a doctor, and the doctor says, will you be willing to consent for us to take your blood? And I said no, because by this point, and I do remember this like sort of delusion / hallucination, I thought that people were trying to like were like going all cult style on me and trying to start a religion off of me, and like they needed my blood. And so I said, no, I'm not going to stand for this. You can't take my blood.
After 2 months of treatment and medication in the hospital, Eric was deemed okay for release.
When we learned that Eric was going to be released, we were in a state of panic. We were trying to advocate, what, are you kidding me? He's not anywhere near where he needs to be. We see he's made some steps here, and he's somewhat stabilized from where he was, but he
can't take care of himself.
He can't take care of himself. I mean, it's clearly he was not all there. We were panicked.
Still delusional, still
we
mildly
were very
delusional.
panicked.
When I was talking to the prosecuting attorney, that I was begging, I said, my son is suicidal and they're telling me they're going to release him. That can't be. And she said that there is an outpatient commitment program, that he remains involuntarily committed.
Remember the hearing at the beginning? That's exactly the procedure Eric went through.
I have a clear memory, as of today, of him signing a piece of paper, and he said, you need to follow the rules, you need to take your medication, be responsible, don't cause a fuss, just basically be a human being. Ask for help if you need it. The help is here for you.
Kurt Bauer, like Eric and Chris, achieved early success, an undergraduate degree, then a master's degree in psychology, followed by special certification in respiratory therapy, a family man with 2 children who worked in intensive care units.
It was very high pressure, it was very interesting and very stimulating.
But his life unraveled when he began to suffer serious bouts of depression and psychosis.
I started spending a lot of time alone. And what I found myself doing was shrinking away from my family by watching more TV. I appropriated one of my son's rooms and I kind of made it my own. And I kept staying in there. And I wouldn't leave there.
His wife, Debbie, tried to convince him to seek help. But like so many others, he didn't think he had any mental health issues. Kurt did agree half-heartedly to visit a therapist.
I went and saw her, and I did the questionnaire and all this, and we talked a little bit, and the impression that I got from her was that the way she talked about depression, she was more depressed than I was. And, you know, things were kind of backwards. And so when I came home, I just said that I just don't think that this is the problem.
Years later, Kurt would testify before a Pennsylvania state legislative committee, calling for changes to state law that would make it easier for families to get help for loved ones too ill to know they need it.
And I continued to alienate and continue to isolate, and a lot of things that happened, I began not to eat, I began not to take showers, I began to stay in bed for 16 hours a day. It got to the point where I'd go to work, come home, stay in bed, wake up, go to work, stay home, come to bed, and no one would see me out of the room. And pretty much it was cycling through that way. And that's how much, you know, isolation and out of the loop that I became.
But pleading was all Kurt's wife, Debbie, could do. Under Pennsylvania law, he needed to be determined a danger to himself or others before the state would step in.
One night I did bring some medicine home. I called her at work and I told her not to come home because I just asked her not to come home. And I did take the medicine. And of course, when you tell someone not to come home, they come home early. And we ended up going to an ER and going through the admission process, and ended up that I was admitted then because it was a suicide attempt.
After his suicide attempt, Kurt spent 2 years in a state hospital before moving to the group home in Harrisburg where he now lives. Failing to get timely treatment cost him dearly.
I lost 24 years of a marriage. I've lost the connection that I had with my 2 sons. And pretty much I lost my job. And pretty much I lost everything that would ever say who I was. I was no longer a father. I was no longer a husband. I was no longer a provider. And there was no definition left of who I was, because now there was nothing left.
Kurt believes effective outpatient laws in place and used would keep others from losing as much as he has.
If you see someone walking up to the edge of the cliff, you try to stop them so they don't go over the cliff.
Today, he volunteers at the Pennsylvania office of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness,
Good afternoon, this is Nami, Pennsylvania. How may I direct your call?
and continues to advocate for change. Kurt believes the existing law makes it almost impossible for families to get help for someone like him. Without the change,
I see a lot more families being ripped apart. I see a lot more people becoming homeless. I see a lot more people going to jail, staying in the cycle of jails, institutions, and suffering that doesn't necessarily have to happen. Why should someone have to be all the way homeless? Why should someone have to lose their job before you treat them? You don't necessarily have to get sicker before someone needs to treat you.
Judge Polly Jackson Spencer designed the Bexar County program called under Texas law Involuntary Outpatient Commitment, IOPC. That's another term for assisted outpatient treatment. Spencer is Judge Kazan's boss.
It is a program in which people are ordered to comply with a treatment plan that is developed by working with them and treatment provider professionals. And if they fail to do so, then there are consequences. Generally, you wind up being brought back into the hospital. Usually that means they have a history of being non-compliant with treatment on the outside, and we believe that this program is helpful in causing them to be more medication compliant.
There's a treatment team for each participant: psychiatrist, caseworker, attorney, sheriff's deputy, each accountable for the patient's progress to Judge Kazan. And unlike treatment ordered by mental health courts, people in this program do not have to commit a crime to qualify for help. Today, Leticia Jaramillo meets her assisted outpatient team for the first time.
Yeah, I'm Judge Kazan. We've talked a few times, and I'm really glad that things are going good for you right now, okay?
And my name is Leticia Jaramillo, and I'm here to get help too.
All right, well, we're here to give you welcome aboard.
I need help. I mean, I try to do it on my own, but it doesn't prevail, you know.
Well, we're glad you're here.
There's a theory on how the active oversight of a judge can help the mentally ill. It's called the black robe effect.
When you sit a patient at the end of a table and they know they're going to meet with that judge, that sense of authority, that sense of accountability, it comes through to them. And believe it or not, they actually pay attention. I only have 3 little promises that I need from you, just 3,
Okay.
to make this work, okay?
Okay.
Number 1, when you come in here and you talk to us, you have to be completely honest about everything, okay?
Okay.
Because I can't help you if you don't talk to us. The second thing, you have to be where you have to be, and that means make your appointments. This is probably the most important, of all of the promises, it's the most important one I need from you. You promise us that you'll take your meds.
Oh, yeah, like I agree.
Good job. That was it. It was that easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy, but it's not easy. It's easy to say, but it's still coming down on me.
Eric Smith took to the outpatient treatment team's message.
That sense of caring was so reassuring after so much turmoil mentally and just not understanding what was going on in jail, at the beginning of staying at the hospital, just really not understanding anything, just hearing something reassuring, some boundaries, some guidelines, do what you need to do. It all seemed pretty basic, but it was very comforting at the time. I remember feeling that way.
Finally, I think he had the fear of the fear of God and the fear of being non-compliant. He knew how important compliance was. Compliance was his ticket out.
This is everyone working for you, and if you comply with your meds, do what you're supposed to do, this team's going to help you.
Obviously, if I didn't want to take my pills, or if I wanted to be rude to the judge, or just find ways to be held in contempt and get sent back to jail, I could have done that. But the program felt too positive, and I would have felt like I would have been betraying everyone trying to help me out and myself if I were to not follow through with these easy things they were asking me to do just to get better.
Eric now adheres to his treatment plan. He's writing music again and is back in school making straight A's. Texas law authorizes assisted outpatient treatment in all counties. But Bayer was the first to use that law to create a comprehensive program. Kathy Weaver credits the political will of Judge Spencer.
She has twisted arms, wheedled, explained, and gone out on a limb for the patients who need her help the most. The revolving door clients in and out of hospital, out of San Antonio State Hospital, and in and out of the prisons and jails of that county.
And I don't like that you have to do it with a court order, but if that's what it takes, I'm willing to do that because I want people to have a better life, and I know they can do that.
Nearly all states have laws authorizing the use of court-ordered outpatient treatment.
I think for the length of time that the Treatment Advocacy Center has existed, we've accomplished much more than I would have thought we could. I was told when I started that it was a hopeless cause to begin with, which made me even more interested in it. The biggest challenge is not so much the laws. The laws now are becoming improved in the states. The challenge is getting the laws used.
This is Rogelio Rodriguez's last day in the Bexar County Outpatient Treatment Program.
Gotta shake hands, brother. And I know it's not much, we don't have much of a budget, but everybody got together and we signed this certificate of completion. And we want to hand it and tender it to you for all the hard work. I mean, all this was you, it wasn't us, okay? And stay on those meds. And then the other thing we're gonna do is, this is kind of a tradition that we have here. A long time ago, the first person we graduated asked us if we were gonna give him a cake, right? Well, we didn't have a cake handy, so we gave him, one of the staff was eating a muffin and handed it to him. And it became such a tradition that this is your graduation muffin, man. You can pretend we went out and baked it for you.
I owe it all to you guys, because without y'all, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. And that's really coming from the heart. And thanks a lot for you guys.
And thank you for
Thank you. That was so nice.
I'm so proud of you, man.
Yeah.
Congrats, that's it.
Great
All right, my
job.
brother, be safe. If more jurisdictions would look towards this model of active court oversight, where a judge sits at the end of the table, if more jurisdictions would commit to hiring a full-time judge to do this, they would see, as we have seen, fewer people going to jail. They would see fewer readmissions.
Bexar County says this program saves $1.5 million a year in hospitalization costs and frees up police and emergency services to serve other citizens. Critics say assisted outpatient treatment violates a patient's civil liberties by forcing treatment and medications on them.
We have found, though, that once they're exposed to our program and they realize, A, we're primarily dealing with only those individuals who are repeatedly being admitted to a hospital or going to jail, and B, that the program is about offering them help. It's not a probation or a substitute for probation. Most of those opponents have slowly but surely come over to our side.
I believe the law should exist in each state that allows you to treat someone who is severely mentally ill, clearly a danger to themselves or others, or in need of treatment on it, before they are homeless, before they are in jail, before they've committed a violent act, before they are victimized. That's the core of what we're trying to do.
Does that sound forced to you? Or does it sound like a program where a person with influence uses that influence to affect decisions made by a very ill person? A person who's not capable of making decisions that are best for them and best for society.
Love this one. It's probably a kindergarten picture.
In my opinion, my son will still be alive if there had been an outpatient commitment applied to him that kept him on his meds. He would still be working here for an engineering firm.
It saved our son's life. I don't know how else to put it.
Absolutely, Eric would not have survived.
We have a relationship with our son that throughout his life we never had.
This is the first time since Eric was diagnosed and he started medication. This is the first time that Eric's ever been compliant for any period of time. It started with the program.
I see that there's a lot of hope, and I see that it doesn't have to be so dark. And I see a lot of families being together and actually working through a problem together and making the family stronger as opposed to tearing it apart.